I don't know how to start this. I've been sitting here for 20 minutes staring at this camera. I've restarted 4 times already. Each time I got a few sentences in and stopped. Because every version I tried sounded like I was defending myself. And I'm not here to defend myself. I'm here because I did something that I cannot take back. And the person I did it to deserves more than my silence. So, here we go. My name is Kayla. I'm 26 years old. I've been with my boyfriend Daniel for 5 years. And 2 months ago, while I was away at basic military training, I cheated on him. Not once. 3 times. With a guy from my platoon. And on the second night, Daniel called me. And I picked up the phone. And I told him I loved him. While that man was lying right next to me in the dark. I need you to sit with that for a second. Because I've been sitting with it every single day since it happened. And it still doesn't feel real. Even though I'm the one who did it. Before you decide who I am based on what I just told you, I need to tell you who I was before any of this happened. Not to make you feel sorry for me. Not to soften what I did. But because I think the most dangerous lie we tell ourselves is that people who do terrible things are fundamentally different from us. They're not. I'm not. I was, and still am, a completely ordinary person who made extraordinary mistakes. And I think that's actually more frightening than if I were some kind of monster. Because monsters are easy to spot. People like me aren't. I met Daniel 5 years ago at a mutual friend's birthday party. I was 21. Nervous. I barely knew anyone there, so I did what I always do when I'm anxious. I stress-baked. I showed up with a plate of brownies I had made at midnight because walking in empty-handed felt worse than being late. Daniel was standing near the window when I got there. He had this look on his face like he was calculating the earliest acceptable time to leave. I recognized that expression immediately. It was the same one I was wearing. We started talking. We didn't stop for 3 hours. By the end of that night, I knew his coffee order. Black. No sugar. Always too hot to drink immediately, but he never waited anyway. I knew his biggest fear. I knew the name of his childhood dog that he still talked about like he'd lost him last week. And I knew the exact way the left corner of his mouth turned up half a second before the rest of his face caught up when something genuinely surprised him. I noticed that half second on the very first night. I never stopped noticing it in 5 years. 2 weeks after that party, he texted me. Are you free Saturday? Depends. For what? Dinner. Your favorite place. I already know which table to request. I stared at my phone. I had mentioned that diner once. The corner table once. He remembered both. I showed up Saturday telling myself not to read too much into it. That didn't work at all. He was already there when I arrived. Corner table. He stood up when he saw me walk in. Not dramatically. Just stood up. Like it was the natural thing to do. Like I was worth standing up for. By the end of that dinner, I was completely done for. 5 years with Daniel was not a fairy tale. I want to be honest about that. We argued. I have a temper that runs hot and burns out fast. He holds things quietly and then says the one exact sentence that cuts straight to the heart of the problem. Both of those things are genuinely difficult to live with. We fought about money, about his family, about the future and timing and all the things couples fight about when they love each other but can't always get out of their own way. But here's the thing. In 5 years, not one single argument ever made me want to leave. Not one moment of frustration ever made me look at someone else and think maybe. Not once. Until basic training. Until Marcus. Until 3 nights that completely rewrote everything I thought I knew about myself. I enlisted about 8 months ago. It wasn't impulsive. I had been thinking about it for almost a year. I wanted something I couldn't quite name. Structure maybe. Purpose that felt bigger than my daily routine. A version of myself I hadn't met yet. When I told Daniel, I expected pushback. Instead, he looked at me and said, "Tell me everything you're thinking. Not are you sure? Not what about us? Not I don't want you to go. Just tell me everything you're thinking." So I did. For 2 hours I talked through every reason, every fear, every hope connected to that decision. He listened to all of it without interrupting once. When I finished, he took my hand and said, "I'm proud of you. And I'm going to miss you every single day." Both of those things are completely true at the same time. That was Daniel. He never made his feelings your problem. He felt everything fully and still made space for you. I drove home that night thinking I was the luckiest person alive. The night before I left, we sat on the kitchen floor eating takeout from the containers because neither of us wanted the formality of the table. Our dog Biscuit kept trying to steal noodles. We kept laughing. Neither of us talked about the morning. Around midnight, Daniel got quiet. He looked at me the way he sometimes did when he was holding something he didn't quite know how to say. "What?" I asked. "Nothing," he said. "Just looking at you, Daniel." He smiled. "Come back to me," he said. 3 words. No drama. No conditions. Just that. Come back to me. I put my hand on his face. "Always," I said. I meant it with everything I had. I need you to believe that part. Because what came later doesn't change what I felt in that moment. It just makes it more heartbreaking. The first week of basic training took me apart completely. I had prepared for the physical side. The early mornings. The running. The exhaustion that settles into your bones by day 3 and never fully leaves. What I had not prepared for was what it does to your sense of self. Everything that made me me was systematically stripped away. My name became my rank. My history became irrelevant. My personality, the parts of me that were warm and quick to laugh and fiercely opinionated about everything, became liabilities. You don't express yourself in basic training. You perform. You comply. You survive. By the end of week 1, I couldn't remember the last time I had felt like an actual person rather than a function inside a machine. Daniel's calls were the only thread still connecting me to myself. When his name appeared on my screen, something loosened in my chest. Like I could breathe normally for a few minutes. But even those calls started to feel complicated. Because hearing his voice reminded me of everything I was cut off from. Our apartment. Biscuit stealing the blanket every single night. The corner table at the diner. The specific sound of his laugh when something actually caught him off guard. Every call ended and left me feeling the distance more sharply than before. I started to dread them a little. Not because I didn't love him, but because they reminded me of how far I was from everything that felt like home. And I didn't know what to do with that feeling. So I buried it. Which, as it turns out, was a terrible idea. His name was Marcus. Marcus Webb. He was in my platoon. 24 years old. From Georgia. He had a scar above his left eyebrow from a bicycle accident he described in way too much detail the first time we talked. I want to be very clear about something. Marcus was not special. I'm not saying that to be cruel. I'm saying it because I think people expect there to be some grand explanation. Some overwhelming attraction. Some impossible chemistry that explains how this happened. There wasn't. He was not more handsome than Daniel. Not funnier. Not more emotionally intelligent. Not more anything. He was just there. Immediately. Physically. Completely there. In a way Daniel couldn't be from hundreds of miles away. And in that environment, in that loneliness, in that stripped-down version of myself that basic training had created, there turned out to matter more than I ever thought it could. The first night happened on a Thursday. 3 weeks in. A group of us were in the common area after lights out. Too wired to sleep after a brutal training day. One by one people drifted away. Until it was just Marcus and me. We talked about home first. The way you do in those situations. The people we missed. The food we craved. The small specific things you don't realize you love about your normal life until they're gone. And then we talked about the training itself. About what it felt like to lose yourself inside an institution. About how strange it was to feel surrounded by people and still feel completely invisible. He said something that I haven't been able to forget. He said, "The hardest part isn't the physical stuff. It's pretending you're okay when the only person who actually knows you is 1,000 miles away." And something about that sentence cracked something open inside me. Because that was it. That was exactly what I hadn't been able to say to Daniel on any of our calls. In that moment, Marcus wasn't someone I was attracted to. He was just someone who understood. And then the talking stopped. And the silence changed. And I made a choice. I need to stop here for a second. Because this is the part where the easy version of this story would say it just happened. That I was overwhelmed. That I wasn't thinking clearly. That it came out of nowhere. I'm not going to tell you that version. Because the first night I could almost believe it myself. Almost. The second night destroyed that story completely. Because the second night I knew exactly what I was doing. I knew exactly where I was going. I knew exactly what would happen when I got there. And I went anyway. That is the most honest and most shameful sentence I have ever said out loud. I went anyway. There is no version of that which makes me look okay. There is no explanation that fully covers it. I made a choice with complete awareness. And then I made it again. And I have to live with that. Every single day. The phone call. I know this is the part you've been waiting for. It was the second night. Daniel called while I was with Marcus. My phone lit up on the pillow beside me. His name on the screen. I looked at it. Marcus glanced over. Neither of us said anything. I want to tell you I hesitated. I want to tell you I felt something massive in that moment that should have stopped me. But if I'm being completely honest, the hesitation lasted about 3 seconds. And then I picked up. Hey baby, I said. My voice was completely normal. Warm. Steady. Like I was alone in my bunk reading a book. He told me about his day. Something funny that happened at work. A new song he found that reminded him of our first road trip. He asked how training was going. I said it was hard, but I was managing. I laughed at the right moments. I asked the right questions. The whole call lasted maybe 8 minutes. Before we hung up, I told him I loved him. And this is the part one really need you to understand. I meant it. In that exact moment. With Marcus 3 inches away from me in the dark. I meant every single word I said to Daniel. I had not stopped loving him for 1 second. And somehow, both of those things were true at the same time. I don't know what that makes me. I've been trying to figure that out ever since. I hung up, set the phone face down, closed my eyes, and told myself tomorrow I would end it. Tomorrow came. I didn't end it. The third night was different from the others. Quieter. There was no long conversation beforehand. No emotional breaking point that led to it. I just went. Like I had already accepted something about myself that I wasn't ready to name out loud yet. Afterward, I lay there in the dark staring at the ceiling for a long time. Marcus fell asleep beside me. And for the first time since this started, I felt it. The full weight of what I was doing. Not guilt exactly. Something worse than guilt. Recognition. The recognition that I had become someone I would not have recognized 6 months ago. The girl who stress-baked brownies at midnight because she didn't want to show up empty-handed. The girl who noticed which corner table Daniel preferred before he even knew she was paying attention. The girl who sat on a kitchen floor and promised to always come back. That girl had made these choices. Not some other version of me that the military had created from scratch. Me. All me. It ended because of Marcus. I have to be honest about that too. It did not end because I woke up one morning crushed by conscience. It ended because Marcus caught feelings. Real ones. For days after the third night, he pulled me aside during a break. His expression was completely different from anything I had seen from him before. More open. More vulnerable. More frightening. I know this wasn't supposed to be anything, he started. I already knew where this was going. Marcus, let me finish. Please. So I let him finish. He told me he hadn't expected to feel this way. He told me he knew I had someone at home. He told me he had been cheated on before. And he said he understood now, sitting on this side of it, why it had destroyed the person who did it to him just as much as it destroyed him. Then he looked at me and said something I will carry for the rest of my life. He deserves to know, Kayla. Whatever you decide about us, he deserves to know the truth. I told him there was no us. He nodded slowly. Like he had already known that. Like it still hurt to hear anyway. I walked away from that conversation and went straight to the bathroom. Sat on the floor. For a long time. Because something about hearing Daniel's name from Marcus's mouth had made it impossible to keep the two worlds separate anymore. They had collided. And I was standing in the middle of the wreckage. The plan had always been to say nothing. I need to be fully transparent about that. My original intention was to finish training, go home, and let this disappear. I told myself it was the merciful choice. That telling Daniel would only cause pain with no purpose. That if Marcus and I never saw each other again after graduation, which we wouldn't, there was nothing ongoing to confess. Just one sealed chapter that would never touch our future. I had almost convinced myself that was true. Almost. But then I started thinking about the mornings. Every morning going forward, I would wake up and know. Every time Daniel looked at me with that complete, uncomplicated trust, I would know. Every anniversary, every holiday, every ordinary Tuesday night on the kitchen floor, I would know. And he wouldn't. That gap would live inside our relationship forever. An invisible weight he was never asked to carry, but would carry anyway. Without knowing. Without choosing. And I realized something sitting there alone with my phone. The person I wanted to be when I came home could not be built on that foundation. I called him on a Wednesday night. I sat outside on the steps of the barracks long after everyone else had gone in. It was cold. I didn't move. I held my phone for almost 20 minutes before I dialed. He answered on the second ring. Hey, you okay? It's late there. The sound of his voice. That was all it took. I started crying before I said a single word. First time I had cried since any of this started. Kayla? Talk to me. What's wrong? I took one breath. Daniel, I need to tell you something. And I need you to please let me finish before you say anything. A pause. Okay, he said quietly. So I told him. I told him about Marcus. The first night. The second. The third. I told him about the phone call. The one where I told him I loved him while Marcus was right beside me. I told him I had planned to never say any of this. I told him everything. He didn't say a single word through all of it. When I finally stopped talking, the silence on the line was the heaviest thing I have ever experienced in my life. Daniel. Nothing. Please say something. When he finally spoke, his voice was so quiet, I had to press the phone hard against my ear. You called me from his bed. Not a question. Just a sentence. Completely flat. Like he was reading something written on a wall. Yes, I whispered. Silence. And you told me you loved me. Yes. While he was right there. Yes. I heard him exhale. Long and slow. I need to go, he said. Daniel, please, I can't talk right now. The line went dead. He didn't call back that night. Or the next morning. For 36 hours my phone was completely silent. I checked it every few minutes. Just staring at his name in my contacts. Willing it to light up. It didn't. I didn't sleep. I went through training the next day completely hollow. Going through drills on autopilot while my mind was somewhere else entirely. Sitting in our apartment. With Biscuit. Trying to make sense of something I had handed him without any warning at all. On the second night he finally called. I grabbed the phone before the first ring finished. I'm here, I said immediately. He was quiet for a moment. I've been trying to figure out what to say to you, he said. I've been sitting here for a day and a half, and I still don't have it figured out. You don't have to have it figured out. I know. A pause. I keep coming back to the phone call. I know. Everything else I can try to work through. The environment. The isolation. The pressure. People make terrible choices under extreme circumstances. I can try to understand all of that. His voice stayed steady the way it always does when he's carrying something enormous very carefully. But you picked up the phone, Kayla. You heard my voice. And you kept going. I had nothing to say to that. Because there was nothing to say. I know, I whispered. What does that mean? He asked. Not angry. Genuinely asking. Like he actually needed to understand. What does it mean that you could do that? I don't know, I said honestly. I've been asking myself the same question every day. That's what I can't get past, he said. Not the mistake. The phone call. We talked for almost 3 hours that night. He asked questions. Hard ones. Questions I didn't always have clean answers to. I answered every single one as honestly as I could anyway. At the end he said something I was not expecting. I don't know what I want to do yet. I need you to understand that. I genuinely don't know if I can come back from this. I understand, I said. But I need you to know something too. Okay. I don't hate you. His voice broke slightly for the first time. Just slightly. I wish I did right now. It would be so much easier. But I don't. I pressed my hand over my mouth. Daniel, I loved you for 5 years, he said. I still love you right now in this moment. And I have absolutely no idea what to do with that. We stayed on the line for a long time after that. Neither of us spoke. Neither of us hung up. Just breathing. Across hundreds of miles. In the wreckage of something that used to be the most solid thing in both our lives. I'm telling you all of this from the other side, not the healed, resolved, everything worked out other side. Not even close to that. The raw still in it, genuinely don't know how this ends other side. Daniel and I are still talking. I don't know what that means for our future. He doesn't either. What I do know is this. I gave him every password. Every account. Not because he asked. Because I wanted there to be nothing left to hide. I told him I would give up drinking. Social events without him. Anything he needed to feel safe again. Not because I was bargaining for forgiveness. But because I finally understood after all this time what 5 years of real love actually looks like. It looks like showing up. Consistently. Every day. Even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. Daniel did that for 5 years without being asked. Without keeping score. Without ever making me feel like I had to earn it. And I had taken all of it so completely for granted that I didn't realize it was something fragile until I had already cracked it. I know some of you have already made up your minds about me. That's okay. I made choices that deserve judgment. I'm not asking for your forgiveness. I don't need it. What I need, the only thing I actually need right now, is to be honest. Because I spent 3 weeks lying. To Daniel. To Marcus. To myself. And I'm done with that. So here is the most honest thing I can tell you. I did not cheat because I stopped loving Daniel. I did not cheat because something was missing from our relationship. I did not cheat because Marcus was irresistible or the situation was impossible to avoid. I cheated because in a moment of profound loneliness and disconnection, I chose the easiest thing instead of the right thing. And then I chose it again. And again. And each time I told myself a slightly different story about why it was okay. Until I was on the phone with the man I love. Telling him I loved him. While living proof of my own lie was lying right beside me. That is who I was in those 3 weeks. That is what I am capable of. And I think every person in a relationship needs to hear that sometimes. Not about me. About themselves. Because I never thought I was capable of this either. If you are away from someone you love right now, if the distance is harder than you expected, if you feel invisible and disconnected and far from the person you used to be, please hear me. That feeling is real. That pain is valid. But it is not an excuse. And it will not feel like an excuse later. When you are sitting outside in the cold holding a phone you are terrified to dial. When you hear his voice answer and you don't know how to begin. When the silence on the line after you finish talking is the heaviest thing you have ever experienced. It will not feel like an excuse then. It will just feel like what it is. A choice you made. That you have to live with. Forever. Daniel hasn't decided yet. I don't know if he will stay. I don't know if I deserve for him to stay. But I know this. Whatever he decides, I am going to spend the rest of my life being someone worth coming back to. Not for him. For me. Because the girl who showed up to that party with stress-baked brownies at midnight. Because she didn't want to show up empty-handed. That girl deserves to exist again. And I'm going to find my way back to her. Even if I have to do it alone. If someone is waiting for you to come back to them. Come back whole. Come back honest. Come back as the person they fell in love with. Before it's too late. And if you've already made the mistake I made, tell the truth. Even when it costs you everything. Especially then.